And Shabbat Shalom to everyone. You know, for those people who are missing the last 3 weeks, I have to remind people what we're doing, and I've decided this is the last week of this is it, Glenn. Glenn, this is okay. If you have to vote or bribe me, do something. Anyway, so as most of you are aware, each week we've been doing one of the prayers of the Siddur, and the goal is escaping mindless religion. That's the only way to describe it. I firmly believe that we shouldn't do that which we don't understand. And I know there are other ways of looking at religion. You do it and then you understand it. I understand that approach, but it doesn't work for me. I have to understand what I'm doing, or I can't do it, or it's irrelevant to me. So we have done over the past weeks 4 different prayers. The prayer after the first blessing before the Shema, which was Ma'ariv Aravim and Ahavat Olam, and then we did Emet Ve'emunah, and then we've done Hashkivenu. There'll be a test. Everyone's going to... That I remember what prayers we did is a major accomplishment. Let me tell you. But in any case, so we're going to continue this evening. And again, I apologize to those people who have missed what I spoke about for several weeks. And they're not recorded, so they've just gone into eternity, to echo into eternity. So well over a year ago, and I could be incorrect, Becky and Nathan, we made a liturgical change. I don't know if people noticed it. I did, and I really think it improved what we were doing here. It used to be that if you take your prayer book for a second, because you're going to need it, turn to page 25 in your Siddur, and this is the first page of the Amidah, and what we would normally do would be, we would read the entire thing in English. And one of the reasons that I thought to do that is that there's a sense that we need enough English in the service. So I thought this was a good place to do consecutive English. But it just didn't seem right, so I said to Becky, let us chant the first paragraph of the Amidah, that which we're talking about this evening, let's chant it. And so Becky learned it very beautifully, and it's become part of our service. I don't think anyone, did anyone recognize we made a change? No, of course not. Glenn, you did. But Glenn, you're taking notes.
It was a very easy transition.
It was easy?
Yeah.
What do you mean it was easy?
It seemed very consistent.
It was organic. You know, that's the word. But Becky and Nathan wove it into the service, and what makes it even more interesting to me, and I noticed it particularly last week, is that now we're at a point where everyone joins in singing it. And it's easy. If you don't know the Hebrew alphabet, you can sing it in a transliteration. We actually have people singing. And let me tell you, 12 years ago when I first came to New Reform Temple on a Friday night, no one sang. I think they were afraid to open their mouth. At least we got rid of that. So let me talk a little bit about the Amidah and in the first paragraph of the Amidah. And it's not going to be as long as what I've done the past weeks, because I think I've gone on too far. So I want to make a couple of interesting points about the prayer. First of all, the choreography of the prayer is important. The Amidah on Shabbat has 7 sections. And the whole choreography of it is the idea of standing before the king, the sovereign. So when one's worshiping this prayer, we maintain a certain amount of formality in the presence of royalty. And we follow some of the conventions of being in a royal situation. And since I'm obsessed with the royal family in England, I can really connect with this. So we stand traditionally, okay? We're not so good in choreography in this congregation, but that's a whole other topic. So we stand erect, feet together, and according to tradition, we take 3 steps forward before beginning the prayer, and we take 3 steps backward while bowing from the waist after concluding the prayer. It all has to do with the experience of being before the king and withdrawing. I mean, you don't turn your back on the king. I mean, if I hear anyone turning their back on King Charles, they're going to hear from me immediately. So let me read the exact translation of this first paragraph of the Amidah. Okay? It says, "Bless," and this is really fundamental. If we don't get this prayer, we're not getting something basic in our worship. It says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, our ancestors' God, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, Jacob's God, great, mighty, revered God, supreme God, who acts most piously, who's master of everything, who remembers the piety of our ancestors," which is a very important idea that we're going to get to, "and who brings a redeemer to their descendants for the sake of his name in love." Our God, our King, helps and saves and protects. Blessed are you, Adonai, Abraham's protector. Okay? That's the prayer. It's rather simple. Now, let's go over what it's saying, and then we'll get into what I find interesting about it. It's a beautiful text, and it celebrates reverence for God. Yud-He Vav-He, the God of Israel. Our God is our ancestors. Now, it's interesting, avot in Hebrew means fathers, but in this context, it can also mean ancestors. And yet, we'll get to that in a moment, okay? Now it goes on to say, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And one of the reasons why according to tradition, why that is mentioned that way is because of Rabbi Yossi Bar Hanina said that each of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instituted one prayer. Abraham, the morning prayer; Isaac, the afternoon prayer; Jacob, the evening prayer. And this view is supported with biblical quotes indicating that the patriarchs prayed at the times mentioned. And what a beautiful idea. The patriarchs invented the prayer. I mean, trust me, they didn't. But it doesn't matter that they didn't. That's what the tradition says. And it links the depth of our tradition back to the patriarchs themselves. Now, God is all-powerful. God does chesed. God does loving acts. God remembers the piety of our ancestors. There's this idea called zechut avot. We are given value as individuals. We have a right to stand before God because of the righteousness that our ancestors did before us. We have that God controls the entire world. And then we have this idea that God will bring a Messiah, a Redeemer to the descendants of the patriarchs. And God protected Abraham with the implication that God shields us. So let's go to what our tradition, what our prayer book says. And you know something? I like taking shots at our prayer book. But tonight, I got to say, we got it right here. And I think the traditional prayer books and my conservative Jewish friends haven't gotten it right either. And since I'm a recovering conservative rabbi, how'd you like that? How'd you like that, Rabbi Rudnick? Was that good? I'm here to make you happy. You weren't here for like 3 weeks, and I was going crazy. I thought you rejected me. I can't deal with that kind of rejection. Okay, so let's look at what it says here. It says on page 25, We praise you, God of our mothers and our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Sarah, God of all generations. You bestow loving kindness on all your people. You remember the devotion of those who came before us. And as you guided our ancestors with love, you offer hope to us, their descendants. You are our creator and helper, our guide and protector. Now, there are a lot of interesting things that are happening here. Number one is the Union Prayer Book that we have has introduced the matriarchs. Now, you might say, well, that isn't so interesting and that isn't so innovative, but it really is. I mean, I have, and I wasn't kidding, I was kidding about the conservative movement. That's where my roots are, and I have a lot of connection to it on multiple levels. But it's very interesting I have a copy of the first page of Lev Shalom, the prayer book of the conservative movement, and it's rather interesting. On one column, there are only with the patriarchs. Then the left-hand column, there are patriarchs and matriarchs. And I find it interesting to the effect that I don't know how you do this. I remember at the seminary when I was in rabbinical school in the late 70s, early 80s, this whole revolution was taking place. Should you include the matriarchs of Israel along with the patriarchs? And of course, there was a rumble about this in the service. In the service, it's all changed now, but in the service on the main floor, no women were ever to be mentioned. On the service downstairs, sometimes you could do it, sometimes you couldn't. And then ultimately it was a decision, it's up to the person leading the worship to do it. That's a great solution. But interestingly enough, the conservative movement never resolved it. Isn't that interesting? So I'm thinking to myself, how do you talk about egalitarian Judaism without making a statement at the very beginning of the Amidah that you need to be inclusive of the matriarchs? I'm not criticizing the conservative movement. I'm asking a theological question. Do we believe in egalitarianism or don't we believe in it? Do we believe that our Judaism is not only rooted in the patriarchs, but don't we also believe that we're connected to the matriarchs? I don't see how you do it this way. I just don't see it. It's a beautiful prayer book, but when I see it, I get really nervous. What is really your commitment to egalitarianism? Okay? Now, there's another thing that I find extremely interesting. If you look into the prayer book and you look very carefully, there is a change between there's a change of one word. Our prayer book has changed the word. It has been changed for a long time. The Orthodox world has their position, and interestingly enough, and I had to go research it, the conservative movement has the original word. What am I talking about? It says here in the prayer book, let me read it in Hebrew, Umevi geula lifnei v'nehem. You will bring, in our prayer book it says, you will bring redemption to your descendants, meaning us. But it says in the traditional prayer book, including the conservative prayer book, it says, Umevi goel lifnei v'nehem, who lovingly brings a redeemer to their children's children for the sake of divine honor. In other words, do we believe in a personal Messiah, or do we believe in what the Reformed Jews have always been talking about is the Messianic world, the Messianic redemption? They're two different things. Do we believe in a personal Messiah? Do we really believe that there will be a Messiah, a person, a political figure who will come and do all the things that the Messiah is supposed to do? Or do we affirm, as the Reformed Jews have done for a very long time, to say the idea of a personal Messiah is a metaphor, and we're really talking about our goal to create a perfect world? We changed it to Geula. Interesting. The rest of the Jewish world didn't. I think we're right because I think we're telling the truth. And I'd be interested to know how many people who use this prayer book in other contexts, who use other versions, not our version, but more traditional versions, really even understand the difference between Geulah, redemption, and Goel, a redeemer. Do we believe in a Messiah, or do we believe in a world going to perfection? It's a very fundamental religious issue. Somehow you got to decide. I think we're on the right side of this, because I think it's consistent with our own theology. And then finally, and I think this is probably the most beautiful part of this prayer, and I think the idea was first introduced to me in some prayer book that quoted Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher. And at the very beginning of the Amidah, it says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, our God, Velohei Avotenu, the God of our ancestors, the God of our patriarchs, Ve'imotenu, and our mothers. It doesn't matter if you're in a traditional one or not. Then it goes on to say, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Sarah, the God of Rivka, the God of Leah. Why do you need, if it says our God, the God of our ancestors, why do you then have to say specifically the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob? It seems repetitive. And Buber came up with this beautiful idea that really has always inspired me. It says the reason why there is a difference here is we affirm the God of our ancestors. Avotenu, Vimotenu. And yet, each of the patriarchs and matriarchs had to come to their own understanding of God. In other words, you can't inherit an idea of God. You have to come to your own understanding of God. And it seems to me, when I read this paragraph every time, when I dive in this paragraph, it reflects the inner tension that I feel in my own religious life. That is, I am an inheritor of a tradition. I've been given a tradition that I love, but on some level, I have to make it my own. In the same way that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had to come to their own understanding of God, I have to come to my own understanding of God. I have to come to my own understanding of our tradition. It's really, in a beautiful way, the seed of the progressive view of Judaism. Judaism just can't be inherited on some level, and I don't mean this to be heretical, that each of us have to create it for ourselves, because if we don't make it personal, it doesn't mean anything to us. Boy, have I beaten this prayer up. But there's so much in it. And I mean, so much of what we're about is we're struggling with it. We're struggling with is our relationship to God, is our relationship to the past only through the patriarchs or through the matriarchs? How inclusive are we of gender? The issue being, what do we mean by the Messiah? And the third issue being, we have to find our own path to God. These are 3 home runs in like 4 sentences. So I hope you got something out of that. I think it shows how important this prayer is. It indicates how so many issues in terms of liturgy are the dividing line between different groups. In the end, and to really be serious, it's wonderful that there are various versions of this prayer book, because it forces us to think deeply. And what in my Judaism is, someone's asked me, what kind of Jew are you? I am a Reform, conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Hasidic Jew, depending on what side of the bed I get up in the morning. And that's good. I want you to be as confused as I am.